It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. We got a question today from our friend Blockmaster Scott. Longtime subscriber. Blockmaster Scott says, Ramsey, can you make a video on intentionally going to the bottom, as in pulling guard, in the context of jiu-jitsu or mixed martial arts? You know, when the guy is on top of you, I'm sure there's got to be scenarios where someone does that on purpose. He left this comment on a video short titled, Winning the Furious Race to the Bottom is Not a Prize. He thought it was going to be a video about pulling guard in jiu-jitsu. If you're not familiar with pulling guard, it's something you see a lot at jiu-jitsu tournaments, where instead of fighting for a takedown, one fighter will jump, throw his legs around the other guy, drag him to the floor on top of him, and then proceed to do jiu-jitsu from the bottom in an attempt to win. Why do you see that in jiu-jitsu tournaments? Well, it's the point structure that encourages that behavior. I explained the rules of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, scoring, IBJJF rules, to a judo black belt friend of mine, and afterward he said, why would anybody ever go for a takedown if you score 2 points for a takedown but also 2 points for a sweep? Wouldn't it be advantageous just to pull guard and then go for a sweep? And I said, have you ever seen a jiu-jitsu tournament before? No, I haven't. That's exactly what happens 80% of the time. Yeah, 80% of the time in IBJJF tournaments, the match starts with a guard pull. 80% of the time. Statistics are kind of weird because if you look at them, also 80% of the time, if one of the jiu-jitsu players initiates a takedown, he wins that match 80% of the time. Weird, right? So you would think, when we compare the numbers, 80% of the time, the vast, overwhelming majority of the time, the guy who gets the first takedown wins the match, whereas only about 50% of the time, the guy who pulls guard wins the match. And yet 80% of the people are pulling guard as opposed to fighting for the takedown. But, man, the points in IBJJF tournaments encourage that type of behavior. If you're not familiar, you get 2 points for a takedown. That's where you start on the feet, put the other guy on the floor, hold him there for at least 3 seconds against his will. Then you get those 2 points. You get 2 points for a sweep. That's when you're on the bottom in a guard or half guard position or even a quarter guard position, and then using your legs and your body, you manage to get a reversal and get on top. You get 2 points for that. You'll get 3 points for a guard pass. That's when you're on top in the guard and you pass the guard into a dominant position, such as side control. You get 2 points for knee mount, 4 points for back mount, and 4 points for full mount. And a submission is an automatic win, and there is a very long list of rules explaining something called advantage points and penalty points, which are basically tiebreakers, because a jiu-jitsu tournament cannot end in a tie. Somebody has to win. You got to keep moving those tournaments along, because they take a long, long time when you have a lot of competitors on the mat. So the furious race to the bottom, as far as pulling guard in jiu-jitsu goes, what's up with that? Is this good for the streets? No. Is it good for MMA? No. Is it an acceptable strategy that can work out in your favor in a jiu-jitsu tournament? Yeah. Do I like it? No. But does that change the fact that it's a viable strategy that many jiu-jitsu athletes have used and continue to use to win jiu-jitsu matches? Because it is. Okay. Is there ever a time in the sport of MMA where pulling guard is a favorable option over fighting for the takedown? I would say rarely, but here is that situation. If you are losing the stand-up game, essentially you can't touch the other guy with your stand-up, and you can't out-wrestle the other guy either. Essentially, you can't score on your feet. But you have a really strong guard game, you might want to pull guard Maybe. It really depends on your bottom game compared to the other guy's top game. I actually did this in a couple of fights. I actually pulled guard in a couple of fights. One, I was being taken down. The guy shot in for a double leg. He was getting the takedown, so I was like, oh, might as well wrap my legs into full guard and fight from here, because I knew my bottom game was better than his top game once we hit the ground. And I ended up winning that fight. Great. So, powered by this memory of thinking, oh, I'm a good bottom player, I'm good at the guard, I can submit people off my back. I remember fighting another guy later on, and he was getting the best of the stand-up exchange. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to pull guard on him and submit him from the guard, from off my back, because, I'm good there. And so I pulled guard, and he put a ton of pressure on me from the bottom. Guy had a bit of a wrestling background, and put the squash on me for a bit, and landed some elbows and punches, and roughed me up on the bottom, and I was like, this is not going the way I pictured it in my mind. Perhaps my bottom game is not as strong as I thought it once was. Which reminds me of another question somebody asked me in the comments section, something along the lines of, when will I be good enough to make a self-evaluation as a martial artist? Well, you should be reevaluating yourself every single day, man. Because you're not the same person on a day-to-day basis. And what you think you know is an illusion. What you don't know is much, much more vast. And if you're doing it right, you're always going to make people who are going to make you ask questions and question yourself and make you wonder, how good am I really? Because I'm not as good as I thought I was. Whoa, there's more to learn. There's levels to this game. Anyway, so I got squashed on the bottom a bit, and eventually the referee stopped the fight. And so that was not a great time to pull guard. I mean, I guess maybe it might have been preferable just to have a referee stoppage without significant damage, because I was able to control most of the damage from inside the guard. I wasn't able to submit him. I didn't take a horrific beating. Some punches and elbows landed, but I was able to minimize most of it. Whereas on the feet, man, this guy was going to town. So I did lose the fight, but it may not have been the worst strategy. Let's see here. Why do people pull guard in jiu-jitsu tournaments, besides the points? Well, if they suck at takedowns, or they're simply not as good as takedowns as their opponent, and let's say there's 5 minutes on the clock, or 6 minutes if you're a blue belt, or 7 minutes if you're a purple belt, so on and so forth, right? And you spend half of that time fighting for the takedown, wrestling with the guy, trying to do judo, probably bad judo at that because you trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instead of judo. And then you're left with like 2 minutes to fight on the ground. And you're tired and you have 6 more matches in the tournament. It's a lot more efficient, energy efficient, to pull guard. Now, I'm not trying to encourage you and say, hey, go pull guard at jiu-jitsu tournaments. Use the strategy that's going to give you the best option to win fights. Man, pulling guard, at least jumping guard in jiu-jitsu tournaments, is the main cause of catastrophic injuries in the IBJJF. A lot of people don't know that. They think it's all the illegal stuff like heel hooks that's going to mess up your knees. No, it's jumping guard. Jumping guard has blown out more knees than any other technique in jiu-jitsu. And yet nobody talks about it. Everybody's been demonizing leg locks for the longest time, like, oh, you gotta be so careful when you gotta be careful when practicing every submission, so you don't maim or kill or break your training partners. That goes without saying. And yet, people jump guard with reckless abandon. The bottom is not an advantageous position in an MMA fight. People say that it's a neutral position in BJJ, and it depends on the relative skill sets involved. If you have a really strong top player and a mediocre bottom player, it's not neutral. If you have a really strong bottom player and a really weak top player, it's not neutral. But people consider it a neutral position. In MMA, it's absolutely not. You cannot argue that the guard bottom is a neutral position. That's a beatdown position. Unless you are specifically using the guard to accomplish one of 4 objectives. Strike, land strikes, do damage. Stand up, get back on your feet where you can do damage. Sweep, get on top where you can efficiently finish that fight. What are those S's? And the last one, submission. If you're not able to stand up, strike, or sweep, then we work for submissions in an MMA fight. And you chain those together. You chain those movements together. And not necessarily in that order, but that is the list of priorities. Do damage with the strikes while attempting to stand up. The stand-up attempt will create some space if you fail that to attempt a sweep. The sweep attempt, if you fail that, will create space to work for a submission. A failed submission will lead you back to strikes, which will lead you to openings, to stand up, etc., etc. It's the vicious circle of the 4 S's of guard in the sport of MMA, but it's not a position of power. It's not. It's not a place you want to fight to be. You want to fight to be on top in an MMA fight. Think about this. You have an MMA fight, and the judges are looking at this. It doesn't end with a knockout, doesn't end with a submission, no TKO, right? So it goes to the judges. Here's what happens in the fight, right? They're both even in the stand-up game, right? The judges score them pretty much even. The effective striking, 50-50. Then one guy takes the other guy down, gets on top, and holds him on the bottom. And as far as damage and strikes, about 50-50, right? And then the bell rings. Who won the round? The guy on top, the guy who initiated the takedown. Why? Because he did more to win. And he controlled the more dominant position. So, the furious race to the bottom in terms of pulling guard. Yeah, not a lot of reasons to do it in an MMA fight. I mean, at the amateur level, if you're a really strong guard player, you might be able to beat a bunch of people by pulling guard and submitting them if they don't know what's up with the submission game. But high-level professional MMA, no. That's not going to work out in your favor. Thanks for the question. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.
Brought to you by xmartial.com. Use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything. That's xmartial.com. High quality training gear and fight apparel.